Hello, everybody, and welcome to Office Hours. All right, so how's everybody doing today? Nice to see everyone's face, and I want to welcome everyone on Facebook and YouTube. If you're joining me, go ahead and chat in your questions. If you're not familiar with Office Hours, I do this every week on Wednesdays at 1 o'clock p.m. Eastern. You can go ahead and ask me any music-related questions that you have. If you want feedback on your playing, I do that during my coaching session for members on Tuesday. Just go up to the live training link in the members area, and you can see the other training sessions where you can get feedback on your playing. But this is time to ask me any music-related questions, equipment questions, mindset for playing, any of those questions. All right, so let's see. Who would like to go first? Who has a question?
Maybe I have a question, Willie.
Excellent, Michelle. I would love to answer your question. How are you doing today?
I'm fine, thank you.
Excellent.
Really great. It's a blue sky here. It's beautiful.
It's finally warm here as well. 63 degrees, so it's nice. Sun is shining. So, all right, what's your question, Michelle?
Okay, my question is that I don't. It's the difference between playing in time and playing rubato, and I'm still not sure when. How can I say that? There is an in between, which is neither rubato nor in time. I would like to better understand what is the rubato because I'm not sure where it is.
All right, so if I take, let's take Misty here, right? Because we just did that lesson. So oftentimes, okay, so if I have, here's the chord changes for Misty, right? So oftentimes rubato will be typically, well, first of all, if you're playing solo piano, then rubato can be anywhere you want. But oftentimes rubato is going to be in a group setting where you might play an introduction or maybe even an ending that's a little bit more out of time and it's a little bit more free. You got to remember that rubato, basically rubato is meaning that the time is more fluid and loose. And if you're playing with a group, obviously that's a little bit difficult. But a lot of times, we might take something like, like the last 8 measures of Misty, or 8 measures of a standard, and just kind of play around with it. Right? And then 1, 2, 3, 4. 2, 3, 4. So you hear how I came into time there. But in the beginning, let's say I do an intro here. Do you hear how you don't feel? You can't just count that out. 1, 2, 3, 4. You don't feel the time yet. But then as soon as I come in, 2, 3. Right? Now you start to feel the time. Right? So rubato, the timing of rubato can be whatever you want it to be. Again, like taking Misty, I could do something like. Do you feel that difference between when I'm playing rubato, how the time is very loose, versus when I come in with time?
Yeah, I understand that. So that means you always have to have the contrast. You need to have part of it rubato, and to see the difference, you need to have in time as well.
Yes.
Both, one after the other, I mean.
And another good way of looking at this is like, what if I do this? Are those downbeats or upbeats? Right? You don't really know because I haven't counted it in, so you don't know where the time is. But if I say 1, 2, 3, 4, right? So if this is my time, now you can hear that those are your upbeats. Another way of thinking about it is syncopation. Syncopation is the alternation between downbeats and upbeats, all right? So that you're not always like playing on a downbeat, you're not always playing on an upbeat, you're changing that around. But if you don't have that steady beat to kind of have as your foundation, then it's going to be virtually impossible or very, very difficult for you to really be able to hear that syncopation. Does that make sense?
Yeah. What is exactly the relation between syncopation and rubato?
So all I'm saying is that just like in rubato, if you don't know where the time is, right? If there's no time that's established, then it might be very difficult for you to kind of hear rubato in there. It might feel more like a push and pull. Again, if I take Misty. Can you hear how I'm like, you feel that push and pull? Sometimes I come in a little bit sooner on some chords. Sometimes I kind of wait a little bit more, but the time is ultimately there. You can kind of feel that beat, and it's easy for you to kind of follow along with me. Whereas if I truly play it rubato, then it's like. Right? Can you feel how it's like you can't lock into a steady beat there? So that would be considered more rubato.
Okay, fine. Thank you. Thank you. I will think about all this.
All right.
Thank you so much.
You betcha, Michelle. You betcha. Rick, question on creating some variation on the shell version of standards. Go ahead, Rick.
Hi, Willie. I'm trying to keep myself focused on shells plus, and as I mentioned in one of the past meetings, it's easier for me. I can play with adding in another chord tone in the left and a little bit in the right, and it's easier if I kind of start doing that right from the start. I'm going to try with this arrangement to actually do the shells myself before I look at yours. And so one of the things I'm thinking maybe I can do is sometimes I see you'll do a quick, I don't even know what it's called, a trill, where you play the 3 notes real quick. And then you've also shown us, like with Misty, how you can go up an octave, or and I'm wondering, what are ways to take some of the things like the rootless chords and some moving an octave or doing a little frill here and there that you can mix into that basic shell version without getting too distracted or off task, so to speak, because I don't want to try to create things that are too. So there's a lot of like pieces we're learning. How can you put all those together into a simple kind of shell plus arrangement, I guess, is my question.
Okay, great question. Thanks, Rick. So first thing to understand about like pretty much everything that you learn at the piano, but let's really just focus on the accompaniment side of things for right now. Each accompaniment is kind of its own thing, right? So you got your shells, you got your bass line, you got your rootless chords, you might have a oompa, or a root stomp kind of thing. And in each one of them, you want to get down well, because in order to be able to start to bring them together, you need to know each one of them individually. So the first thing is definitely making sure that you go through and you feel extremely confident on each one of those concepts. When you start to bring them together, there's no one right way of doing it. It's really a lot of playing and arranging. Is you learn these what seem like disparate parts, and they start to naturally come together based on the things that you hear, based on the things that you learn, based on just trial and error and practicing. Now, one thing I definitely suggest is, like, let's say you're going to take shells again, right? So you have, right? So you got your basic shells, root 3, root 7, you know, and all of that. And now you want to start to add something else in there. It's always a great idea to go through either the entire song like multiple times, or at least each time through the song, and only focus on one concept. So if you want to move beyond just doing shells, so it's like, okay, so you got shells here, but then you also have these rootless voicings as well. You also have bass line. You can also break up the shells. So take one concept and try bringing that one concept through the entire form of the song. One great one that I like to encourage students to use is just breaking up the shells. So you see how rather than just playing the shell all at once, I break that up a bit, right? And typically what I'll do is I'll play the whatever the bottom note of the shell is, right? So the root, and then whatever the top note is, and I'll usually keep that root held down, right?
Mm-hmm.
So see how I'm holding down the A flat, but then I play the G. So rather than playing them all together, right, I'll break that up. And one great benefit of that is that helps you to kind of fill in the space. All right, so you could do that, right? Let's just say you could do that. You obviously want to practice that and get good at that.
Yeah.
Now, once you could do that, now start to add in some other chord tones, you know? Oops. So you see what I just did on the A flat?
Yeah.
So what did I do? I played the root, the 5th, the 7th, and then I went down to the 6th, and then back up to the 7th. Gets a little bit more motion in there. And what I'm doing is I'm picking notes that I know that are going to work very well on the chord. On a major chord, the 6th is going to work great. On a dominant chord, that 6 turns into a 13. That will work well also. On minor chords, adding in like the 5th or the 11th. So you could try playing around with bringing in one or more notes of the chord to create a little bit more motion in that left hand. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's perfect. And that's a nice bridge. I mean, I'm doing some of the bass line stuff, but that gets a little hairy, frankly, keeping it going and steady. So
Sure.
I like picking the chord tones up. You can do it subtly, and I can probably do some of that that arpeggiating or splitting them up, like you said, on the A part, and then I could switch it the second time through. And then can you just show me, and this is probably something everyone, the little trill you do where you play the 3 notes
like that?
Is that as simple as it looks?
Well, it's as simple as it looks. It's just a technical, you need to work on, the technique of that. So if I just take 3 notes, start with my second finger, go up. I don't remember exactly, but I think in classical music that's called a mordant, I think. Don't quote me on that one. But it definitely comes from that classical mentality. It's a very common
up to a target note or down, or doesn't it matter?
It doesn't really matter. I mean, you could like if I go right. So here, that's going to work on my E flat. I want to make sure the notes are going to work on the chord that I'm playing. If I did, that's right. Right, like hitting the D flat on an E flat major chord, that's not going to work so well. Or here's an even better example. Right?
Yeah.
That's not going to work. So some of that you're going to base that off of maybe the scale that you're playing at the moment. But if you're doing it, let's say I want to do it on that last note. So you see what I chose for the E flat was I went up to the E flat rather than going to the E. even though that's real quick and you barely hear it, it adds just a little bit of tension that you might not want.
All right, that's perfect. That's something I can just practice and sort of mess around with. I think a little bit of that really sounds nice. If it's too much, then it gets
If it's
tiring.
too much, it's too much, right? Like anything else, any technique, if you do the same technique over and over and over again, it starts to sound very trite and it starts to sound overused.
Perfect. That's just what I needed. Appreciate it.
Awesome. I got a question here on Facebook. Hey, Willie, do I have to hear notes before playing them when improvising, or is it fine to go by chords or scales? Hearing what you're going to play takes a while, all right? Like, remember, music and improvisation definitely is like a language. And the reason that we say music is like a language so much is that the same rules apply. When you're learning a language, well, what do? You learn vocabulary, then you take those vocabulary words, you start to build them into sentences. You go from sentences into paragraphs. You go from paragraphs into, like just writing, a document. And then when you go from paragraphs into the document, then you can get into those writing techniques of, you have like an arc to the story, right? That kind of stuff. Typically we see in a movie, it kind of gets all started, everyone's all fine, and then there's a problem, right? That's like kind of the middle of the movie, the apex, and then there's some kind of a solution. Well, the same thing happens in improvisation as well. But in order to be able to hear that stuff, it does take time. Now, one thing that you could do is, if you want a great thing to practice, is try singing along with your improvisation when you do it. Now, it's a little bit more of an advanced concept. And to answer your question, you could just stay with scales and chord tones for right now. There's nothing wrong with that. But as you get more advanced, if you want to kind of make that connection more between your ear and then what you're playing, then you can go ba 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 right, so you can start to sing along with what it is that you're doing, and that helps you to kind of bridge that gap a little bit more. I've heard many times over the years, over the decades, that if you can sing it, you can play it. Right? I've heard that from numerous people, and in many ways, it's true. If you could hear it in your ears, then you have a much, much better chance of being able to play it. But to think that, okay, I'm going to start learning improvisation, and now I'm supposed to be able to hear all of this stuff before I start to play it, no, that would definitely be putting the cart before the horse. So you definitely start with stuff that you know is going to work, like... Right, so a lot of chord tones in there, right? And you're utilizing those chord tones, and then from here you can improvise more from a theoretical standpoint. So you understand the theory, you know the chord tones, you know that these chord tones work along with that chord of the moment, all right? But you might not necessarily hear it in your ears yet, all right? So you start with that first. Obviously, in the Confident Improviser, at Jazzedge, we go through step by step by step by step and like really build up your improvisation skills. And then so that's a little bit of an easier approach, or I would say probably a much easier approach than just jumping right into doing chord tones. So if you're not familiar with the Confident Improviser, definitely take a look at it at Jazzedge, or subscribe to the Confident Improviser podcast. You could find it right on Apple. But let's say that you're going to do chord tones. Well, now once you know your chord tones and you could play your chord tones, you can start to sing those. Right? And then even if you're not quite on pitch, don't worry about it. It's absolutely fine. You'll get better at that over time. A lot of times when singing, it's just as much about the rhythm and you singing the rhythm that it is about singing all of the notes accurately, right? But if you try that singing approach, that will help you to be able to hear much better what it is, that you're playing. All right, Virgil, in the interview with the band on the Chick Corea gig, you mentioned the bass player suggested during the break that you have more space. How do you not take that personally? I think that would have really irritated me. That is a fantastic question. I am so happy that you asked that, Virgil. So let me back up for 1 second, and let's just, we're adults, right? Let's just lay it on the table. When we listen to somebody play, right, there's probably a little part of us that's like, I wish I could play like that. Why can't I play like that? And maybe there's a little bit of jealousy. If we're being human, right? Let's just be human for a second. We get jealous. It's okay, but that's healthy. Where it becomes unhealthy when it's like, oh, I'm not going to listen to that player because I don't like this. And I'll tell you, I did that myself. When I was in high school, I remember being exposed to Keith Jarrett, and and of course Keith Jarrett is like, an incredible player. But of course I had like, Mr. Big Man on campus, right? I poo-pooed because it was like, oh, all that, all that vocal stuff that he does annoyed me. So I just put it off to one side. Stupid me, all right? That was dumb of me to do it. And it took me a couple of years later, once I was in college, and I listened to it again, I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, all right. I was stupid for not listening to him and, just dismissing it because of that. So the thing to remember is the ultimate goal of what is it that we're trying to do, all right? And we're trying to make music, and we're trying, again, not to get too pie in the sky and roses and daisies, but trying to bring art and beauty into the world. There's so much garbage that you can read. Just turn on the news and you see nothing but the bad news day in and day out. So music and art in general is a way to bring that beauty, into the world. We need that as human beings and as a society. So the one thing I try to do is I try to embrace that, okay, when I listen to other musicians, I'm like, like now I'll listen to a great player, and rather than being jealous, I'm like, go get it. Yeah, I love it. I'm like happy and proud for them that they're playing so well, right? Now, when working with a group, you're working with other humans, right? It's if you go out and you just play with iReal Pro or band tracks, and I see some musicians do that. Well, that's great. Then you don't have to worry about it. If you don't like what the bass player has to say, you simply hit the space bar and you stop them or mute them or whatever, and you don't have to worry about it. You're in complete control. But when you're working with other musicians and other human beings, you got to understand they bring their personality to the table as well. And I've been in some situations that have been extremely tense, and so I try to approach it in that I have a job to do, and my job is to make music, and my job is to support the other musicians that I'm working with, right? Now, if they ask me, hey, look, can you do a lot of it too, Virgil, has to do with how they ask. Like if he comes up to me and is like, dude, what are you playing? Like, that's so stupid what you're playing. Like, why are you playing all those notes? Okay, well, that's going to start to ruffle my feathers a little bit. That's where I might be like, okay, look, that's fine. Okay, if you don't like what I'm playing, you can give me your ideas or whatnot, but you need to chill out. We got to work together on this. Now, he asked me in a way that was like, he actually felt embarrassed, and I put him at ease, and I think he even said it in the podcast of how my reaction to him put him at ease. So guess what? Check. My job is done then, right? What I did was I made it so that felt better for him. I put him at ease because if there's tension, what do you think is going to happen in the next set, right? It's going to be tense and it's going to be, all that stuff. And the music is going to suffer. So I always remember that, it has to be about the music and the art first. And even though people are going to bring their personalities to the table, you got to just let go of that. I remember I was doing a gig one time, and the drummer, who was not like this fantastic drummer or anything, like he wasn't a jazz drummer or anything. I'm playing, and he like yells at me on the gig, he's like, "Get out of my space!" Okay, get out of his space. Now I could think whatever I want to think in my head, of what kind of person he is or how he reacted to it. I think he could have done a better job of communicating that, but he's the band leader. So, what are you going to do? All right. So in that situation, were my feathers ruffled? Sure. But I kept the gig going and kept doing the gig. and then, move on with it. So, unfortunately, there's no clear answer to it. It's that interpersonal relationships. If you're playing solo piano, hey, you could do pretty much whatever you want. But then you're still going to get the people that are going to come up to you. You're going to play, a version of a tune, and they're going to be like, well, I heard this version, and it was way better than the version that you just played. Okay, great. Then go listen to that. Have fun listening to that. You don't have to listen to me play. So it's that interpersonal relationships are really, really sometimes difficult, and you got to just let it go. All right. You just, you let it roll off your back, and you don't worry about it. And that also is the same thing that goes with, if I'm like, right, those mistakes in there, I could let that mistake, I could keep thinking about it and rolling it over and over and over in my head. And what's going to happen? The music is going to suffer, my performance is going to suffer, and it's just going to go downhill from there. So one thing as an artist is that you have to deal with the critics, and there's always going to be critics, both professional writing critics, and then just everybody has an opinion, right? And you have to learn to let go of that and move on, right? I'll share with you a Chick Corea story. Okay. I love Chick's music. I love it. But I haven't shared this story with my students, but I'm going to share it with you right now, because had I listened to this, I wouldn't be here right now teaching. Jazzedge would have never existed. Piano with Willie, my lessons would have never existed had I listened to this. It was maybe 20 years ago. I saw Chick and Bela Fleck, who's the banjo player, do a duet concert in New Bedford. And if you're not familiar with Bela Fleck, fantastic player, B-E-L-A, Fleck, F-L-E-C-K. And I went there with my publicist. I was probably, I was probably 23 at the time, 24. I had written my Jazz Kids books. I was teaching young kids how to improvise through Jazz Kids. It was starting to get some traction. I was seeing results with my students. They loved it. They were actually able to improvise, like kids as young as 5, 6 years old, being able to sit down and improvise using these techniques that I created. I'm all proud as punch. I have my books. I go backstage. Oh, Mr. Corea, I love your music. I've followed you for so long. And then, I wrote these books to teach, young kids how to improvise. Oh, yeah, no. You can't teach improvisation like that. That's not the way to do it. They have to feel it more organically. And it was like, here's my hero for years that I used to listen to his music. And now he's telling me that basically the stuff that I created was garbage. And had I left that and said, oh, you know what? Chick Corea told me that my stuff was garbage. Well, if it's garbage, then why should I bother to keep doing it? I would have quit right then and there. But I didn't listen to that advice. Now, obviously, I'm going to give Chick credit. He really didn't take a look at the stuff, right? It was just like, who knows? Maybe he was having a bad day. Maybe he got into a fight with Bela Fleck after the gig was. Who knows what was happening? He's a human being just like the rest of us. And he had his opinion, which I absolutely respect, right? But I didn't follow it. He's entitled to his opinion. I just didn't follow it. But had I listened to that, this whole thing would have been shut down and we wouldn't even be here right now. So it's so important in the arts. You got to have that thick skin and you got to just let stuff roll off your back. And when you have a vision of, look, this is what I'm doing and this is why I'm doing it, it's so important to stay true to that vision. So hopefully that helps. Let's see. Okay, I got to get through here real quick here. Bruce, go ahead.
Well, talk about thick skins. I think you got to give a thick skin to Tom Brady for the last 20 years.
Sure. You have a question about enclosures?
The question I have, what's that?
Go ahead.
The question I had was the enclosures. First of all, that was an excellent number 22 lesson. I loved it on enclosures.
Thank you.
The question is that basically for dominant chords pretty much only?
No. The enclosures are really well, remember, we've talked about in improvisation, if we just take something simple like C minor 7 to F7, right? So C minor 7 to F7. So we've talked about having a starting note of your improvised line and an ending note of your improvised line. And typically the starting note and ending note, to at least get started, pick chord tones. Those are going to be the ones, the good ones to get started with. You don't always have to do chord tones. You could do tensions as well. But when you're getting started with improvisation, you're trying to really kind of get it solidified, you start with chord tones. So that might mean I might start with the third of E of C minor and then go to the third of my F. Right? So I end on that. I end on the third of the F. Start on the third of C, go to the third of F. So now the enclosure can be around any of these notes, right? So a lot of times I'll do the enclosure maybe around the starting note, all right, or on that ending note. So let's say I do it on the ending note. Okay. So you see how I did that, the double chromatic getting to the A. But it doesn't have to be on a dominant chord. I can also do it on that minor chord. Right, so you see how I can approach that third as well with an enclosure. Whole step above, half step below to the target, right? So the enclosures are really getting to a target note, whatever that note is on whatever chord that is. What the enclosures do is it allows you to build out your lines with some more chromaticism and add in some more notes in more linear fashion, so that you're not just playing a scale or chord tones, right? So if I do, right, so I mean, okay, that's fine, it sounds okay, but it's a little bit boring. Whereas if I go, right, now here I happen to be getting to the A for an F7. Let's say I'm going from C minor to F minor. So you see, double chromatic from above, still getting to the third of the F minor. So the answer is that it works over any chord. The enclosures are really about targeting some notes. Make sense?
Yes. So I think we're getting to, I'm trying to work out a practice routine for the way you look tonight. So I was thinking is just taking the chords, the chord tones, and practicing. And there's, I think, 6 different chords in the song. I mean, in the standard version of the song. Mm-hmm. So I was thinking of basically going through each chord and using the chord tones and doing an enclosure for each chord tone.
That's exactly what I would recommend. I think I've talked about it before, but again, let's just take my C minor 7 chord and let's just take a very simple enclosure of half step above, half step below to the target. So I can play the chord right here. And a lot of times when practicing this, I suggest go with the block chord, just so you could have all the notes. Those are all your ingredients right there. Those are all the notes that you're getting to. Right? Then go half below to half above. Right? And then from there, now you can start to not the best line, but you can see how you
go
can start
from one chord to another chord.
Right. You can start to move from one chord into another chord. But yeah, just starting with each chord and going through some enclosures on each one of those chords is a great thing to do. I remember I used to practice like right, so there's a double chromatic from above, double chromatic from below on each note of a C7 chord, and then do it on, right, and you could do it, on every one of your chords. You could practice those enclosures on each chord, and going from that into building the lines, there isn't like this clear, like, okay, you do this, then that, then that. it's
Right.
you kind of build out those enclosures on the chord, and then again they start to organically start to come into your playing. All right.
Yeah. And the question I have, and I think I know the answer to this, on the 9th and the 13th, is you use the 9th when you're using the 3rd on the bottom, the rootless chords, and you use the 13th when you use the 7th on the bottom? Or is there a rule for that? Because on your dominant chords in that example, 2 of them have the 13th, 9th. And I was curious if there was is there a rule for that, or
yeah, a better way of thinking about it for the rootless chords is this. Start with your rootless chord. Let's just take a C7 chord. Make it simple, okay? So we start with our guide tones first. Pinky's going to go on the bottom guide tone. Second finger is going to go on the other guide tone. It's always going to be those fingers for right now, okay? Grain of salt, all right? Just giving you a generalization right now. There's going to be one note that happens in between them and one note that happens above it, okay? Obviously, the one note above it is not going to be way up here. It's going to be somewhere close that you can get to. All right, so you got your 3rd and your 7th. All right, so now what other notes sound good on a dominant 7th chord? Could I put my 5th down there? Yeah, sure, if I wanted to. And I could put my 9 up there. Why would I do that chord? Well, you know, I might be playing maybe some more blues kind of stuff, R&B stuff, and that 13th adds too much tension. So I might decide to do that instead. You know? So look at what I'm doing here. From C7 to F7, I'm adding the 9th on the C7. I'm adding the 9th on the F7. Notice I'm not adding in the 13ths, and that gives me a little bit more of a... It gives me a little bit less tense sound than, right? That sounds, you know, much more jazzy. So you have your 3rd and your 7th, or your guide tones. It could also be your 7th and your 3rd. You put one note in between, so it's going to be that. One of these notes, okay? Let's bring it up here. Let's say I want the 9, and then one note's going to go above. Okay, I could do the 5th. I could do the 13th. All right, that's my typical C dominant 7th chord, right? Rootless voicing. But now I could play around with this. Let's say, you know what, I don't want 9. I want flat 9 instead. Still with the YouTube. All right, so unfortunately, we ended up having a little bit of a crash there. All right, so anyway, I still have a few more minutes left. I know some of you had questions. I saw a question there. There was one from Marilyn as well. Marilyn, I think you were next. Are you still on, Marilyn?
That was just a comment. That was when Michelle was talking about rubato. And I remember one of my teachers said, well, you borrow a little time here and then you pay it back over here. I thought that was and that was probably when I was doing a Chopin etude or nocturne or something.
Yeah.
You do a lot of rubato, and that was just a comment.
I like that. Yes, definitely. Like it's that give and take.
You give a little and you take a little. Right. It's this kind you do kind of feel it, you know, where you want to pull back and where you want to go ahead.
Right. All right. So let's see, Lloyd. Question again. This is probably way too broad, but the band is starting up again, classic rock, and I was wondering what would be the next step rather than just playing chords and inversions. Band includes bass player. Well, you know, a lot of that is going to depend on what the style is, right? So if you're, you said classic rock. All right. So one thing that I would definitely suggest doing, especially if you're dealing with, you know, rock music, is utilize those randomization exercises that I created, right? And just really get down all of your triads, all inversions. That's just really like just trying to work through that, right? Because what you want to be able to do is you want to be able to move to chords quick, right? And be real steady with them. And then you can also do things like start to bring, well, here, let me pull up the iReal Pro, the randomization thing here, and you can see. So you could bring in some other styles as well. So this is one of the randomization sheets. Okay, all right, so this is blues funky, fine. So I go through this. So you see what I'm doing is I'm just going through and playing each of these chords and trying to like play it along with the band and being able to move between chords that are not in a common progression, right? And it's a great way of forcing yourself to like be able to move in between these chords that don't sound like they should go from one to another. Here, like, so like more of a classic rock stuff, I'm going to be thinking tries. I'm going to be thinking adding in that ninth as well. You know, then I can go in here into something like iReal Pro, and I could put in, I think it's pop, and then let me put like a slow rock. This is going to be like more like a ballad. So do you see what I'm doing, Lloyd?
Yeah, it's still basically the chords, just, you know, putting little fills in, but basically using the triad chord tones. Right.
And then that triad primer lesson is a great lesson to take a look at for some of those ideas as well. The Floyd Kramer lesson as well. That's another good one to take a peek at. And there's some good stuff in there. And of course, there's a bunch of other rock lessons on the site as well. But just getting started with this. So what you're saying is the band is going to get started up again. You're going to be playing again. So you really want to make sure that you have down your chordal stuff, right? So that you can move in between.
You know, with most of the, you know, chords, most of the inversions I'm pretty comfortable with, but then it's like, what's the next step? You know, maybe breaking them up, adding some fills, that sort of thing.
Right. So I mean, see what I'm doing here on like the F.
Right.
See, I'm adding in that second. So a lot, like bringing in a lot of those nines, because in rock, you're really not going to bring in a 13 or an 11, something like that. It's going to be mostly triadic based, adding in some nines in there as well. But, you know, even though I say like, oh, you're just going to add in some nines, there's a lot of stuff in there to practice, you know, just in terms of like even adding in the ninth, as you can see, as I'm breaking that stuff up.
But it's a good, yeah, like you said, it's a good idea, I think, to try the different styles.
Yeah.
And then it almost flows from the style what you're going to be doing.
Right. And then, you know, again, with iReal Pro, then it's like, oh, you want to change this up again? Boop, move it to a different key, right? And
Right.
now it's like, now there you go. And then you could go in and you could say, all right, now let me do something like, okay, I'm going to play one chord as a minor, the next one as a major. The first one is a minor, next one is a major. And even though they're all as major chords here, and the bass is going to be playing probably the third in there, if it's on a rock style, a lot of times the bass is going to be playing a lot of roots and fives anyway. So it kind of leave it open. So the first one as a minor. Right, so you can have a lot of fun with that. Then as you're going through that, then you start going through your repertoire, right? Whatever tunes that the band normally plays, you start practicing those again. But this kind of a exercise will really help you to be able to get at least the accompaniment part of it nice and steady, right? And then also there's a little bit of improvisation in there, as you can hear as well.
Right. Now I'm also trying to stay away from, you know, the bass, you know, just playing bass notes, not step on him.
Yeah. And then a lot of times in rock, like even if I do this, that's fine, as long as I'm not like, you know, like playing around down there and really getting in their space. But if I'm playing the octaves, that's absolutely fine. But then you could also say, hey, let me go through here and I'm going to do like these chords. Right? So there's a lot of room in there for creating a lot of different exercises for yourself.
Okay. Thank you.
You got it. John, in a minor 2-5 progression on the minor 7 flat 5 2 chord, always be replaced with a simple minor 7th chord, except for when the melody is the flatted 5th. Okay, so basically, you know, if I'm doing a 2-5-1 to C minor, a lot of times it'd be D minor 7, like a G7 flat 9 to like a C minor 7th, right? So the question is, can you replace it with a regular minor 7 chord, right? And then that's the question, right, John? Can you replace the minor 2-5 with a regular minor chord, correct? Yeah, all right. So number one, you're absolutely right. It's going to depend on the melody, right? But a lot of times that minor flat 5 chord, you got to like take a look at what's happening here, right? Right? That's the natural 5. And it might be resolving up to the third of the 5 chord, and then resolving down to the 7th or up to the root. So you want to think about that voice motion. This right here is likely going to sound off because that minor 2-5, what is it based off of? Right, that D minor 7 flat 5, G7, C, right? It's based off of that natural minor scale or the harmonic minor scale, right? So if you play the natural 5 in there, right, now that's going to give you more of a Dorian sound. So a lot of it is you're going to have to use your ears on that. There's no rule to say that you can't change the minor flat 5 into a regular minor chord, but you're definitely going to want to treat it with a little bit of care, okay?
Okay, thank you, Willie.
You got it. Rena, oh, Gil, you have a question. Go ahead.
Here? Okay. All right, Willie, I was Oh, by the way, I love the exercise 22 and the TCI. I love that that progression.
Oh, great. Thank
It
you.
kind of sounds like I could use it as a vamp. You know, I was wondering if yeah, I was wondering if you're gonna if is that the only way I could use it, or do you have other examples where I could use it in inside of one of my songs with my band? Because we're always looking. I love vamps because it gives the bass player and a chance to stretch, with the trio. And
Well, remember, like, here's the progression, right, for the TCI for 22. Okay, this progression right here is also found in tunes. So.
Oh yeah.
Right, you could hear that progression, kind of like spinning wheel is kind of like that progression as well. So one way in which you could start to use this stuff is think about it in terms of copy and paste. So when you see like this, like a D7 to a G7, those ideas there that you're learning in the TCI, you could start to paste them in as long as it's stylistically appropriate, right? I mean, like the TCI stuff is skewing more jazz right now, because that's more of creating a lot of that linear motion. As we move on, we'll start to branch out into some other styles. But really, we start with the jazz stuff first because, quite frankly, that's the harder stuff. If you can get that down, then it's like now to move into like rock and stuff it's a little bit of stylistic tweaking, but a lot of it is like, okay, we're going to actually take some stuff out, right? It's going to actually be a little bit easier when we move over to some of these other styles. So when you see these progressions in tunes, you could take that idea as long as the line is stylistically, appropriate, and you could start to plug it in, right? And that's the whole idea, is that when we're learning improvisation, we typically learn improvisation over these stock progressions, 2-5-1s, 2-5 progressions. In fact, exercise 23 is going to be going back to the 2-5, adding in the rootless chords for everyone, because I know in the inspiration lessons, you guys have been doing the rootless chords, but if you haven't been doing the inspiration lessons, you haven't. So that's going to be coming in. But then we're also going to be talking about the Dorian bebop scale. We're going to talk about the David Baker bebop lick and stuff like that. So some of this stuff, like these progressions, you learn the progression, you learn some of these different lines and ideas over the progression, that then you like take that idea and you just go boop, and you like plop it right into a tune, right? It doesn't always work neatly like that, right? So the idea is that you really just work the exercise, and then as time goes on, you will notice that it will start to come out in your playing, right? If you know the exercise well, if you've practiced it several times and really worked at it, then you're going to notice it's going to start to come out in your playing. Some of that stuff you can't really plan, right? It has to come from a organic place. Otherwise, it could sound very much like, oh, I just put a lick in there, right? So I always suggest, if you could find places in tunes that you can utilize, that lick, go ahead and try putting it in during practice. When you go to performance, maybe it comes in, maybe it doesn't, all right? But that's the way I would approach it. Make sense?
Yeah, I think I have to do a little work, but I like to transpose this into like all 12 keys and make it like automatic, so that I can go to it like anytime, like I feel I could throw it in there during the performance,
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like, and you want to get that stuff automatic underneath your fingertips. And then as it starts to get automatic under the fingers, then it starts to seep into the ears. You start to feel it. You start to, kind of dream about it, right? You hear it in your head. And then at that point, that's when, while you're playing live, boop, that comes out,
Yeah.
So, but to get to that point, it just takes that practice.
Yeah, well, that's a great line. Are you going to are you going to put like different versions of this in future lessons?
The
like
enclosures?
That one, pardon?
You're talking about the enclosures and stuff?
Well, that accompany, like that little extended dominance. I'm quite sure there are other voicings and other things I could do with that progression, right?
Yeah. And you know what? I'm going to punt that question to the TCI on Thursday, right? Because that's where I could show you some other stuff that you could start to do with it. And then that would kind of go along with that TCI, course. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm not sure if we'll be doing this progression again per se, but the techniques that you're going to learn in future TCI lessons, of course, you could bring back to this. Remember that TCI is all about, like 22 was bringing in enclosures, right? We really haven't talked a lot about enclosures yet, at least in TCI. It's all over on the site. You can, do searches for that. I have an improvise in 30 lesson. You could take a look at that one. Talk about enclosures there. But in the TCI program, this is the first time that we brought in enclosures. Remember that concept, even though we've brought it in, we're not going to keep talking about it, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist and you can't continue to bring it in, all right? It's, again, that stacked learning. It's like kind of like, okay, once you understand 2 + 2 is 4, right? We're not going to keep going back over 2 + 2 = 4. We're going to add on to that, but you're going to utilize that knowledge as you go on, right? So the main thing is really making sure that you practice it well to get it underneath your fingertips, and that you understand, at least at a, overarching, 35,000 foot view, the concept. Okay, enclosures moving to a target note like that. Okay, I get it.
Oh, okay. Thanks, Willie. Yeah,
Gil. All right, Rena had a question here. Let me read through this quick. I'm just beginning to learn at the site. Welcome, Rena. Thank you for being here. I played many, many years ago and was sort of early intermediate player then. I was wondering about suggestions on how to develop confidence, how to practice to achieve that. For example, I'm working on step 3 of my romance and could just manage to play it through with the emotion that I like. But as soon as I add the backing track, even at the same tempo, I get intimidated and fall apart. Should I just keep trying through at that tempo, or slow the track down, practice more with the track, and get more accomplished with it first? All right, so the step-by-step standards, the My Romance lesson, is a bit, it's sneaky, right? Because there's a lot of information embedded within that lesson, right? I did another lesson called the 12 Days of Jazz Standards. And within that lesson, I laid out a concept of going wide versus going deep. I would definitely suggest taking a look at that 12 Days of Jazz Standards. And the idea is that likely what's happening for you, right? Well, number one, a couple of suggestions. Definitely come to coaching. Let's see your playing. I want to hear your playing. Remember, in coaching, everybody is super supportive, right? I don't allow anything less. So there's no critics during coaching. Like, make whatever mistakes you make. It's absolutely fine. And whatever level you're at, I have some students that are literally like, playing simple chords, and other students are like, doing all this stuff. So it doesn't matter what level you're at. Come to coaching, share your playing, and it will be a lot easier for me to be able to react to that. Because without hearing you play, it's like a doctor prescribing medicine without actually seeing you, right? It doesn't make sense. So that would be definitely something I would suggest doing if you can make it on that Tuesday. Or you can also come on the Thursdays for TCI, and you could share your playing there as well. So what's likely happening is that you're moving on to the next concept, and you understand the concept and can play it. But as soon as now the backing track is on, the backing track is forcing you to play in time. And it's almost like you have this thing like on your back that's like, okay, you gotta play it right. It has to be in time, and you can't make any mistakes. And it starts to build up some of that nervousness, right? Perfectly natural, happens to everyone, right? One way of combating that, well, a couple of ways. Number one, slow it down, right? Slowing it down would definitely help. Playing smaller sections and focusing on practicing smaller sections. Take 4 measures at a time. Really get down that 4 measures. Then get the next 4 measures, next 4 measures. Make sure that you don't always start your practice at the first 4 measures. Move it around, okay? Because otherwise you're going to get really good at playing the first 4 measures, but then everything after that is going to start to fall apart. Always make sure that you really practice the bridge a lot. A lot of times these standards are in AABA format. You play the A section 3 times, you play the B section once. You can already see the math of which one you're practicing more. So make sure you practice that B section several more times to bring it equal weight to the A section. And the other thing is, you take just one concept. So like maybe if you're on step 2 or like just doing the shells, really work that hard. And then you might decide to jump over to the standards by the dozen. Do those lessons, right? We have 3 of them. The 4th one is coming out. Well, actually, the sheet music was just released. And then you take the concept of, say, doing shells, and you do that on multiple standards. So then you build up your confidence of playing shells. Why do you do that? Because when we're going to play a song, whatever the song is, but in this case, let's take a standard, we might, like, if you go through My Romance, you build up all these different techniques, right? Like, say, like 4 or 5 different techniques. Now you try moving that to another standard. Well, guess what? You got to kind of start from the ground up, and you got to start to work that up, because when you practice those 4 or 5 techniques on one standard, you really didn't practice them enough to own them and to master them. So rather than taking and going through all 5, instead do one concept like shells. Move it through multiple standards, 4 or 5 different standards. Get really comfortable at playing those shells over 4 or 5 different standards, so that then when you come to a new standard and you're like, okay, I'm going to do rootless chords, or bass line or whatnot. If you get stuck, you could always revert back to playing those shells, right? So if I do, all right, so I'm doing my rootless chord voicings. Oh, I forget. Oh, I can get back to my rootless chords now. Right? So you see, I went from rootless chords, and I kind of went down to my shells just to keep it in time and keep the song moving along, right? But in order for you to like revert back to playing shells, you have to own that concept really well, right? So I think working through those shells, some of that beginning layer on multiple standards would really help. Also, that 12 Days of Jazz Standards course, take a look at that one. I think that would, I think you would really get a lot out of that one as well. And again, welcome to the site. Mickey, asking for suggestions after scales. Go ahead.
Yeah, about 3 weeks ago, Willie, you and I had a one-on-one, and your suggestion was go through all the major scales, all 12 of them, which I've done. And it's coming together nicely. Good. I'm just wondering, at the end of this week, which is the 4th week of practicing scales 4 times a day, what would you suggest for a next step? Should I try a song? Should I try some other exercises?
Well, one thing, if you take a look at the Piano Essentials tips lesson, right? There's some good tips in there of like some different things that you can start to do. But you can then, if you wanted to, you can move on to arpeggios. That would be a great thing to move on to. There's a lesson called 6 Essential Arpeggio Exercises. That lesson would be great to take a look at. But then the other thing that you could start to do is, if you want a great exercise, which I've talked about several times in the past, is to start to, there's 2 ways of doing this exercise. You start to take one scale and then really start to improvise around in it. Now, one thing you could do is just take like I'm going to take my E flat major scale here, right? And now I'm going to just play my E flat chord. So you see, I'm just playing the chord here, and I'm just kind of messing around with the scale over here. If I'm messing around with that scale, and I'm like, right? And I'm like playing notes that are all not part of that E flat major scale. All right, well, now I know. That tells me that, okay, I really have to make sure that I'm visualizing and seeing those notes of that E flat scale. Another great exercise to do is play the scale in the left hand and like quarter notes. right? So now I really have to know that scale in order to keep that steady while playing another scale. Now, if you want to challenge your ears, do this kind of stuff. All right. Sounds good, huh? Right. So play 2 different scales at the same time. You'll have fun with that one. Right. Now, as soon as you could do stuff like that, then you could feel pretty confident, like, yeah, I feel like I kind of get down this scale pretty well. But a lot of times, you know, and I'm not saying that this is you, but a lot of times, you know, again, you get that big man on campus like, yeah, I can play my scales. You know, I'll say, all right, we'll try that. It all falls apart, right? So what you're trying to do is you're trying to make it so that when you think about your major scale, I should be able to ask you, and you should be able to almost immediately tell me answers to these questions. Like if I said to you, again, taking E flat major scale, how many sharps in the key of E flat? If you say anything other than none, well, then right there. Okay, 3 flats, or what other? E flat, A flat, B flat. All right, great. Spell the E flat major scale. E flat, F, G flat, no, G, A. Okay, so obviously you don't really know. It has to be E flat, F, G, A flat, B flat, C, D, E flat. What's the 3rd? Right. G. What's the 13th? C. What's the 9th? F. What's sharp 9? F sharp, right? So those are the ways in which you could test yourself to make sure that you really know it. And those are also the ways in which you can kind of push yourself a little bit further on those.
Okay, great.
All right.
Thank you.
I'm going to have to just blast through these last couple of questions real quick because I got to go get the kiddos at school. Jody, when is the marathon lesson for the way you look tonight? Next Tuesday. And I said I was going to put it in the coaching calendar. So thank you for reminding me on that. I will put it on today. So if you take a look at the calendar later on today or tomorrow, you'll see the schedule. But next Tuesday is going to be the marathon session, and then 2 weeks after that will be the Q&A, and somewhere in there I'm going to fit in the GEMS session, right? Because remember, the week of the 19th I'm going to be away on vacation, so nothing is going to get released that week. Well, actually, I shouldn't say nothing is going to get released. I'm going to record the next TCI, and it will get released that week. I just won't be doing anything live that week. Michelle, I saw you say coaching. Check what I put. Okay. Oh, okay. Excellent. Thank you, Michelle, for posting for Rena. Okay. All right. Perfect. I think I got everyone. And yes. All right. So again, sorry guys, I don't know what the heck happened with my internet connection, but all of a sudden it just kaput. So anyway, all good now. I will be on, let me just make sure I'm checking the schedule here, making sure that everything is correct. We will be doing our TCI session tomorrow at 1 p.m. So feel free to come back tomorrow at 1 o'clock, same time. And it will all be about Confident Improviser. All right. Okay. So anyway, thank you all very much for joining me today. Again, sorry for the little technical hiccup, but all worked out in the end. All right, guys, take care. I will see you later. The replay for this is going to take me a little bit longer because I have to. Well, you know what? I'm just going to put up two video files in the forum. You'll see 2 different video files because I stopped the recording. So you can look for that later on today as well. All right. Take care, guys. Have a good one. Thank you.